Okay, jumping into it. So just trying out a little bit more of the sort of streaming, sort of get these things done a little bit live, up a little bit quicker and that. But of course, a couple of teething issues and that just with the sort of tech side of stuff. But that's all right. So look, basically, just going to have a quick look over the charts, have a look over any sort of news that we sort of had coming out overnight, anything sort of potentially sort of coming up through the sort of session today. And just sort of see if we can sort of pick out any little trades as well. So, first of all, just have a quick look at the news from overnight because we had, again, a little bit of sort of weak USD data coming out. So, it was the Richmond Manufacturing Index, and this sort of goes in line with a couple of the other bits of data we've had out recently. So, we've like I think they had the Empire State last week, but anyway, Richmond Manufacturing now is a negative 11 for the previous, and they're expecting still a little bit of a tick up in that, but still is a negative number to -7. But obviously, it's just as you can see, pushed off in the opposite direction, and seeing a sort of a continued sort of bit of a slowdown there. So it's sending a bit of a sort of mixed message with things because obviously sort of rate cuts are the talk of the town and that, and sort of when they're coming, how much, how many this year, these kind of things. But a lot of the market sort of, although they're saying they're pricing them in, a lot of the market seems to sort of think that, March just won't happen and it's a little bit too early for it. And, the economy is still sort of quite strong. But, these little bits of data sort of coming out, which aren't sort of like your top tier bits of data, but they're, little pieces of the puzzle to sort of put together are showing certainly a little bit of not even just weakness, continued weakness, but actually slowing down. So it's actually moving in the opposite direction. So, you'd sort of think the more that you get this sort of weak USD data coming out, more it sort of adds to the whole idea that, you might actually sort of, it might sort of bring on the idea of having the cuts, or at least sort of testing them out a little bit sooner rather than later. So it's sort of interesting sort of one there. So I'll jump onto DXY and have a look at the impact of that just in a moment because we did see a fairly strong push and actually attempted breakout to the next level of DXY overnight. It did sort of get a little bit of a sell down sort of coming into the end of it. But yeah, I think that could have been also basically a bit of a combination of a few things. We had that China news that was out yesterday. We had sort of, Bank of Japan, or China news, I sort of say it's just more speculative sort of stuff. I think the wording they used to it was mulls. So, obviously it's just sort of they're thinking about it, the potential of it. But if you remember last week as well, we actually had them mention this, and we saw risk get a bit of a push straight off the bat. Like I was watching Aussie at the time, and it jumped 20 points just on the headline. And obviously none of this stuff's concrete. It's not like actual data. There's no sort of, yes, we are doing it. Here's the application of it. I mean, they're trying to sort of save their sort of stock market, which is absolutely getting pummeled at the moment, and it's not really having the sort of desired effect so far. But again, they haven't actually done it, so we'll have to sort of see how that sort of plays out. But other bits of news in that we had sort of the consumer confidence from Euro was also sort of quite weak here, but sort of like, I guess vaguely in line or in the sort of ballpark of the expectation of it all. Again, Euro's been under a little bit of pressure, particularly this week, this year as a whole. And that, I mean, what are we 3 and a bit weeks in now? But certainly overnight as we're talking about it. So yes, we did see it sort of, I don't normally sort of chart the euro, well, not on the streams or the videos that I do, but I will sort of flick across to that because it is actually looking quite interesting at the moment. It's sort of coming down into a little bit of a wedge. Other bits of news, we had New Zealand CPI came in as expected, so I was seeing a little bit of a sort of continued sort of decrease in this. I haven't actually looked to see how that's affected their New Zealand dollar, but you would have assumed a sort of little bit of weakness just off this, but at the same time, it has come in as expected, so it could have also been priced in. And then Aussie data. So Aussie's actually sort of produced some okay data recently. So the manufacturing and services PMIs, the services are still sub 50, but a tick up from what was revised. So what are we having a look? So it was revised down a little bit from last month, but sort of obviously sort of moving in the right direction here. And also the PMIs for the manufacturing actually ticking over 50. So if you have a look, I don't think it's been over 50 for a while. Yeah, as you said, this is the last time since Feb last year. So as you can see, we've been in quite a sort of negative kind of area of this manufacturing. So obviously that is something that it should be sort of bolstering the Aussie, and we've actually seen a little bit of a sort of Aussie strength, uh, well, relative Aussie strength through this morning after getting sort of pummeled pretty heavy sort of overnight. So yeah, that's a sort of overnight sort of news. Sort of coming up later today, we got a little bit more of the PMIs. Seem to be coming out from obviously Euro. We've got the the yen, Japanese one. We've got the pound, all these kind of bits, and then USD later tonight. So it seems like everybody's sort of coming out and sort of reporting their sort of PMI numbers. All right, so look, I'll just jump onto the charts, have a quick look. So start off with DXY here because this was the reaction we saw last night. I think that was mainly actually the driving force. This came at about 6 o'clock. So just if we have a quick look over here, just after we had this sort of, yeah, I mean, it's listed as the low level news, but we're obviously seeing quite a sort of drop off in net borrowing here. They expected a slight little slowdown. This is with the pound, which obviously makes up part of the DXY, and it's actually come in half. So you know, that could have been the sort of the catalyst to sort of get that moving. But certainly 6 o'clock came, you had this sort of technicals, we got it marked out. I think I sort of put it on the Twitter as well, that they had that sort of connection with this sort of rising support here. And that just caused DXY to sort of fly off to the top side here. So we did see a little bit of a sell down sort of come into the sort of end of the night, but you know, you've got to, it's a bit of a tough one because I still think that we've got this little gap down over here, which I'd like to sort of see closed. So, I mean, this obviously would also give us a retest of this sort of range that we were sort of going through the whole sort of week or 2 weeks or so um, previously. And so, like, as I've said a couple of times, not all gaps do close. We do have that one from way back up the top over here. Jump this one out of there. This little gap up here, which sort of never came back and closed, and obviously so just kept going down here. So look, runaway gaps can exist definitely. At the moment, it's looking sort of like, you know, from a technical sort of standpoint, it does look like it's trying to sort of break to this next level, but obviously it's found a little bit of sort of resistance coming into the sort of second half of that, in the second half of the US session there, and obviously sort of pulling back down onto its lows. So, you know, till it sort of breaks this rising support, you got to sort of say, okay, look, it is sort of moving up towards the top side. Major resistance is going to be around this sort of 104, early 104s, 104.20 kind of areas as well. So it's hard to sort of say, like, you kind of think, like, once it's sort of getting up along, up to here, you know, do they just drive it up here, hit some stops, and then sort of like push it back down? So just bear with us for 1 second. Uh, so yes, so it's look, it's a bit of a tough one. As I said, like I am in the camp of a little bit of a cooling off, and sort of I'm looking for the reaction down around this sort of 102 area. 102.70 area. Close that gap, retest to the top side of this sort of range. But of course, that does take you outside this sort of rising support or rising channel, as it were. If we sort of drag this across over here. One thing that I've noticed with these, let's just change this up a bit. Um, if this were to be a little bit of a channel, you would have wanted this last push, sort of like, you know, push Wednesday, sort of last Wednesday, hopefully to have sort of driven up and sort of continued this channel, which effectively obviously would have taken it up to that 104 zone. It's not to sort of say that it can't continue with it, but as you can see, sort of as you start to put in these highs that sort of come away from what would effectively have been this channel, like it's obviously respecting this downside, the sort of bottom side here, which is the rising support. You would have liked to have gone up here. If it fails to make it up to these highs, you start to see a little bit of a sort of wedge almost forming. And of course, the wedges are the sort of reversal patterns as it sort of comes a little bit higher. It's not to sort of say that it can't just sort of, you know, negate this and blow out the top side over to, so, you know, mid 104s. But it does sort of make me think that, it doesn't have the full backing of the whole market with it all, and it is sort of driving higher because a lot of the position, and myself included, was sort of positioned for US dollar, continued US dollar weakness, as we can sort of see, coming through, last quarter of last year. And this sort of just being a bit of a sort of, we hit our price targets, obviously in this main sort of support range. So it's only natural that then you sort of rip it up a little bit to the top side, people booking profits, trying to sort of stop out some technical short levels. As I said, this little area here I was expecting, and I think a large segment of the market for this to sort of come back down to the lows here. A lot of people would have been having their stops over here. This is probably partly the reason that this hasn't sort of come back to sort of close this stop. It would have just been stops galore, basically, just to hit all the way along the top side up over here. So yeah, it's certainly still moving up, but I am still in the camp of I think that US dollar will sort of revisit the lows at some stage. It's just a matter of sort of how high they want to sort of continue to rip it sort of from here. So we are seeing a couple of interesting sort of things. So if we flip across to gold, so gold has somewhat sort of been ignoring the sort of USD move of late. Obviously, sort of through last week, we saw a little bit of a sort of sell down with it, but as you can see, particularly with last night, if I put these side by side and you put this, it's on the 1 hour, put this on the 1 hour as well. So, gold obviously sort of runs with a pretty inverse relationship 90% of the time with DXY. And as you can see sort of through this period here, you can see the little dotted lines sort of matching up sort of with the corresponding charts. As DXY sort of had that first move, we saw gold sort of come off the top as it was trying to sort of break a little bit higher up into that sort of resistance area that we got marked out. We've sort of seen it sort of like for the second part of it, the second push that came up through here, which was sort of coming sort of like, started US equity markets opening, that kind of thing, US session. Gold really didn't sort of take too much notice. Like as you can see through this period here, gold really just sort of, bear with me. These are the sort of two areas here. While USD was making this big push to the top side, gold was really just sort of just sitting and chilling sideways. So to me, that's sort of like, that it's kind of decoupling a little bit, at least in that period it had. And people were buying this despite that last little bit of USD strength. You can see this sort of little sort of short-term falling resistance, which obviously popped through and then sort of exploded to the top side. But as soon as gold started to come off, US dollar started to come off, they were still buying US dollar they were still buying gold anyway. So it just sort of meant that sort of like as you saw this little drive down on US dollar, they're already buying gold despite the US dollar strength. Well, they're just going to buy a little bit more of it as it sort of pushed up to the top side here. So it's certainly one to watch because I think that if we do see a break of this sort of rising support here, I think we could sort of see really the gold market and metals probably as a whole, so probably silver as well, but just gold in this specific instance that we're talking about, really sort of take off. And I think sort of that could really give us a retest back up to these sort of 2050s, 2070s at least for gold there. So I'll just move on to the gold chart. So gold as a whole, basically it's just in a bit of a sideways grind. Like everything, we saw that sort of move last week through when we got the sort of big sort of breakout of DXY. We saw gold really, take a bit of a hammering from the top side here, coming back down to its sort of 2000 test really. But mainly through this week, we've just sort of seen, just a sideways hustle. It's obviously attempted a couple of times to break out. That's why we've got this higher sort of like sell zone here, because we know that, we've got sort of sellers sitting around here. So each time that we sort of come up and clip this, we're certainly sort of weakening it a little bit. But the big lines that I'm sort of really looking at are 30 in the short term, which we mentioned yesterday. And then on the bottom side, this obviously 1920 kind of area. I think a close down underneath here, realistically, you might see a little bit of a bounce around this sort of 2009 area, but it would make sense to me to probably sort of come back down and really test how strong these sort of sellers are if they want to go sort of down under 2002, or to basically 2000 line there. You are seeing sort of like, if these are where the buyers are here, we can see that sort of like, it's obviously tried to break out last night, pushed it back down, as I just mentioned a second ago. They're holding it despite that last or second leg kick of DXY. The buyers have moved up a little bit. And although it's certainly small and it's not enough to really sort of break out a full trend, you got to take the idea that, this is where the buyers were. Now they've got an opportunity. Well, they're happy to pay just a couple of bucks more. Yes, it's only $2 or so, but they are moving in that slight up direction. Sellers are obviously sort of still sitting where we've sort of been sort of isolating them all week, around that sort of 30 zone. I think if we can get a push through 30 again, and as I said, if this can come in the same time as DXY, sort of cooling off a little bit, I think that might be enough to sort of get it through there today. Obviously, sort of if we take out this sort of lows to the 20s, in the 20s, I think that that'll be the sort of the end of that one. But I think today feels like it's kind of coming to a bit of a sort of make or break for these sort of moves in the short term. But really, I mean, the whole week it's just been in, if you take these top ones here, a 20-buck range. So it's been quite tight. We've got a breakout here. We've got a retest of the breakout level. So now you've just got to take out that breakout candle, which is obviously this 2038. And then sort of, I think that could sort of give us a nice little move to the top side here. Just sort of see if we've got anything in terms of, maybe this could be a little bit of a sort of a start of a trend for us here. And you can see if this were to be the case, it'd be a bit of a sort of a rising, ascending triangle sort of coming up to the top side here. So potentially, I think if we can break this 30 line, back up around here, maybe one more test to see if the sellers could come down here. I imagine these buyers that have been here, will then sort of obviously sort of come up around this zone here. And then I reckon this would be probably a fairly plausible move for gold to move up to the top side here. Of course, if we break this sort of falling, sort of rising support, it's not a perfect touch with these ones here, but we are getting a pretty pretty decent sort of rising support, an idea of sort of where the sellers are going, and as the sort of direction they're sort of moving up to the top side there. So yeah, I think certainly above 2030 we might sort of start to see some action with with gold. So excuse me one sec. Okay, as I say, a couple of teething issues with the whole idea of streaming. All right, cool. So flick along. Aussie still trading super heavy after that break and that. Like it's attempted a couple of breakouts a few times here, but obviously just unable to sort of really sort of commit to it. We did see a retest of sort of the weekly highs yesterday, just before it got absolutely slammed down. So again, it is this sort of thing where you're trying to sort of pick these little channels, but if we sort of clean this up a little bit, this one back. Yeah, here we go. So interesting sort of point of where we did sort of bounce last night. If we sort of have a look at this from, in terms of from our lows, where we had that little sort of high heel bottom, which played out quite well, or played out very well. We've sort of seen it's really sort of come back. It's clicked the 61% here. It's held it and it's sort of pushed back off to the top side here. This grey areas are daily supports. So it's also come in line with this. Yeah, it's hard to sort of really get too sort of pumped up about Aussie because every time it does get these little runs, it just gets hammered to the bottom side here. This was the Tuesday night overnight lows, or Monday, Tuesday. And if you drag this up here, it's almost perfect onto the 1.127 retracement as well for the actual lows of last night. And this is where we saw it obviously sort of spring back into action. And it's just sort of been grinding back up sort of through this period. But you can see the sort of the same areas coming into play time and time again. 66 obviously being the sort of the main sort of round, sort of like round number with it all, and obviously the sort of the 80s line, basically the sort of 92s. But it's hard to really, as I said, get too excited about Aussie sort of moving through here. I think if we, again, in line with things, if we can see a bit of a cooling off in the US dollar, if we can see gold attempt for that little sort of breakout, that could give a little bit of reason for Aussie to sort of attempt to get through this sort of area again. But, till it really proves itself, like above 66, sort of 13, I think it's still going to be sort of a little bit sort of in trouble. As you can see, it's trying to sort of roll over here. It is finding buys, and that sort of that rejection from going lower from 65.50. It's not too bad. I mean, we sort of moved up 35 points from the overnight lows, but as you can see it now, 11.25, we're sort of coming in and sort of finding resistance pretty much where we've sort of seen the buyers and the supporters being previously. We can see it obviously sort of sellers trying to sort of come in here again. So I think again, till you can get back up into the 90s, I mean, above until you get above sort of basically these wick highs, which is the weekly highs, I think sort of Aussie's still subjective to, or subject to a little bit of heavy trading and just sort of selling into any little rally that it does have. Cool. We will pop across to copper. So copper's actually sort of been trying to sort of regain this main channel. So if we get back up onto the 4-hour here, we can see that we had that sort of breakout attempt earlier in the week. Obviously, sort of fell back down, but sort of coming through. This is really sort of driven by that sort of that China news that sort of came out yesterday. And as I said, as it was like coming out, basically, I mean, obviously, sort of more money coming into China and those sort of companies, well, that's going to stimulate things, going to stimulate sort of, the manufacturing side of stuff as well, these companies that are going to be producing more. Obviously, copper being one of the sort of most widely used, if not the most widely used metal in manufacturing. Well, obviously, demand's going to go up for that as well. And we've seen the sort of price appreciate quite well on that. So it's back up above this area, which has obviously been a little bit of a sort of swing point for us. If we get onto the dailies here. So, outside the consolidation box that we have marked up, look, it's pretty much come right up to our alerts and that, but not quite there to sort of trigger it to see that sort of full continuation. But, you can see where it's been supported, resistance, support through here. So it is a sort of fairly crucial little line here around that sort of 380 zone. I think if we can sort of get the alarm sort of going off here, it means that we're going to see a bit of a push up to this sort of 385.6 kind of area, where we can see that sort of like, price has sort of been supported a little bit previously. So I'd expect at least some sort of reaction from sellers to try and sort of get back into this to sort of push it and put a bit of a cap on it to the top side here. And again, these sort of things are going to run in line with USD sort of selling off a little bit if we do sort of see that come in that direction, and sort of probably with sort of gold pushing up as well. And this is another thing that might actually get Aussie to sort of really sort of maybe try and hold some sort of rally attempt. I should say as well with Aussie, just flipping back for 1 second, that if we do sort of see a break of these lows, I would say there's a pretty good chance that that would be it for the sellers. For the buyers around this area. I mean, we're on a very steep cliff here with sort of a move down to, sorry, where are we at? So on a daily sort of version, it's sort of 64.74. So, another sort of 60-70 point drop off down to the next support area here. Just again, going back onto Aussie, we did see that sort of measured move, sort of completion, sort of workout last week, and we are sort of trying to hold this sort of little channel. But as you can see, we've come back and clipped it here with yesterday's move, and it got smacked down into pretty heavy. So, till you can sort of really get back up above these sort of wick highs, that gives you above this horizontal, gives you outside the channel. I think those sort of three factors together will give it a good sort of idea to move up to the top side. These wicks from an NFP and the what was this? The US CPI. they're going to provide quite a heavy resistance. So I do think the top side is probably a little bit capped with Aussie, but first things first to get out of this channel. Once it's out of the channel, you pass the horizontal. You've got a couple of sort of factors working in its favor. Um, I think that could sort of see it continue to push up, but again, I think the sellers are going to come back in. I don't think they're going to let it run too far too quickly, and I think sort of 66.50 is going to be quite a heavy sort of resistance for it. Flick across to China because obviously China was the one that really sort of copped it yesterday off that news. It was already sort of coming down, sort of coming into this. Obviously, it had that sort of lower time frame price target, which got taken out quite strongly. The sort of measured move from the head and shoulders after the negative divergence, and really sort of got smacked down yesterday on China's on that news. And it tried to sort of rally a little bit, but it's really trading quite heavy down here. Which is actually interesting because the highs are the level that we got marked out over here. We've sort of seen that sellers have liked to push it down from this area previously. So it'll be interesting to see if we sort of continue to trade quite heavy here. I mean, it is quite sort of heavily sort of oversold, but just on a technical basis, if this was your little range here, well, this is a close outside the range. This could just be a little back test. This is on a 4-hour chart. So if this 4-hour candle flips, look, we do have this sort of main support area coming down just underneath here at sort of 716, 715.80s. I think sort of certainly if we can get down underneath this area, if we can sort of see a depletion of sort of buyers at this level, then back down to testing your main sort of zones at like 712 and the likes. All right, cool, and that's about it for me this morning.